So thank you for being with me on like the first like summer night is what it feels like. I'm honored that you came inside. So here is my plan. I will talk for about 35 to 40-ish minutes and then leave us time to talk. And I'll take questions for a little while. If you have to go, I understand, but I'm happy to linger a while. So I spend my time with girls. I am the mother of 2 daughters. My practice is overwhelmingly taking care of girls, and then I spend 2 days a week at a girls' school in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a lot like your school. And I've been there, I'm going into my 14th year of spending 2 days a week there. So it's really a huge part of my professional life. And I decided to write this book because I feel like there wasn't enough being said about normal development in girls. Most of the literature that's available around teenagers and certainly around teenage girls is about when things are already off the rails, when things are concerning or very, very problematic. And I felt like there was this unspoken or undescribed reality, just like having a healthy kid is still hard, right? And having a kid where everything's going great is still really confusing much of the time. And so I thought I'd try to take that on. I will also say I adore teenagers. I think they are the greatest. I think they are so much fun. It is a time of life that to me is so rich and so pivotal, and there's so much happening, and they're so honest, and they're so clear-eyed, and they're so blunt, and that is really up my alley. And so I thought I really wanted to, in some ways, speak for them and speak for their health and describe how so much of what they do that we don't either like or understand is actually great and working well and works better if we understand it. I thought I would try to take adolescence, which is this big, messy phase of life, and try to organize it, because I'm actually a very, very organized person, so it's sort of a funny thing that I've thrown myself at adolescents and then teenage girls professionally. But I'm like, no, I'm going to sort this one out, right? So I thought, like, I'll come up with a way to think about this in terms of the tasks of being a teenager. And though my book emphasizes the girl version of this, the book itself, what I'm going to share with you, articulates a developmental model that I would say also applies exactly to boys. And I've had several readers say to me, 80% of it applied to my son, which I'm not surprised that was their experience. So what I articulate in the book, and I'll go through these tonight, are these 7 developmental tasks that teenagers are working on as they make their way through adolescence. And this idea that we take development and we can put it into buckets, or we can put it into strands, or various ways to organize it, this is what psychologists do. Like, this is how we always think about development. We try to take it and make it more clear and organized. One person whose thinking heavily informs mine, and she kind of comes up repeatedly throughout the book, is actually Anna Freud, who was Sigmund Freud's youngest child and did a lot of work on younger kids and some on teenagers. And she had this idea of developmental strands or developmental lines, like fronts along which humans are developing. And they're developing on multiple fronts at once. And so she talked about 0 to 5, little kids. And she had, she was writing in the 50s and 60s, so her language reflects this. So one of her developmental strands was, from suckling to rational eating, and from diapers to toilet mastery, So she's thinking about all of these things kids are trying to accomplish. She's a big part of my thinking. The epigraph from my book is from her, and I'm going to read it, and it's not super short, but you'll see why I haven't cut it back. While an adolescent remains inconsistent and unpredictable in her behavior, she may suffer, but she does not seem to me to be in need of treatment. I think that she should be given time and scope to work out her own solution. Rather, it may be her parents who need help and guidance so as to be able to bear with her. There are few situations in life which are more difficult to cope with than an adolescent son or daughter during the attempt to liberate themselves. Isn't that gorgeous? It's so beautiful. Okay, that was from 1958, right? So next year we'll be at the 60th anniversary of that quote. And there's a lot to like in this. One is, I think, it matters to me when this was written, because I think it's so easy to be like, oh my gosh, teenagers today, right? And it's so helpful to have her describe our kids, and with a description that is 60 years old. Another thing that she does, and this to me feels so sorely lacking and something I'm really trying to do with my work, what she's saying is normal development is actually hard, right? If everything is going the way it's supposed to be going, it's actually really hard. And I feel like we've kind of gotten into this weird moment as a culture where somehow the prevailing parent guidance, or psychologists, myself included, like we're doing this thing where we're basically saying to parents, we're making parents feel like, okay, you're supposed to be on top of this, you're supposed to know what you're doing, like your kid's supposed to do what you say, you're supposed to be having a good time, you're supposed to feel like you understand this and you know what's going on, and if that's not what's happening, then like someone's messing this up. Right, and I feel like, okay, that's not what it looks like in my house, by any measure. Like I sort of feel like it's often really, really fun. Most of the time, I can't find any of my stuff. Right? Like, I go to the grocery store constantly. Things kind of feel a mess around the house to me. A lot of this feels kind of tedious. I feel like I'm half paying attention to half of it some of the time, and then like super focused in other times. And like, that's sort of the day after day. I mean, it doesn't feel like I'm on top of this all the time and know what I'm doing by any measure. And so I just think, I so appreciate her saying that this is just rough, right? Under normal conditions, this is a challenging time in development. And then what she's saying is, and parents need support, right? If we're gonna say it is unavoidably challenging to be raising a human being, well then we have to support the parents who are doing it. So, I'm going to walk you through these developmental strands that I articulate in Untangled, and I'll tell you what they are, and they're the chapter titles. So they are parting with childhood, joining a new tribe, harnessing emotions, contending with adult authority, planning for the future, entering the romantic world, and caring for themselves. And so those are the 7 tasks, and I sort of devote one chapter to each. I said this to the faculty as I was working on the book. My editor kept saying, now, are these in an order, or are they all at once? And I kept saying, yes. Yes to both. Like, this order matters to me, but they're kind of all going on all the time. And that, I think, is part of why it all feels so chaotic. So I'm going to come back to each of these developmental tasks, but let me just say a little bit more about what we get out of thinking this way, out of thinking in this sort of task way. One is, I think it gives us a way to make sense of behavior that otherwise is pretty confusing. So for me, the best example, and I think if you've got a kid over the age of 11, you've been in this, where all of a sudden your daughter goes in her room and closes the door for hours, right? And like 6 months ago, the door was open all the time and she was down in the living room. But then like something happens overnight one night, all of a sudden she's just sort of squirreled away in her room and the door is closed. And this is sort of strange. You're like, what's going on, right? And then, this is sort of what it's felt like for me sometimes, where you go to the door and you knock, and then there's like this ridiculously long pause. And you're like, what's she doing? Like, what could be going on? And then she goes, yeah? And you're like, okay, well, she's awake, And then you're like, maybe I'm holding a stack of laundry or something. You're like, can I come in? Right? And then again, like there's this like ridiculously long pause, and you're like, are you making meth? I mean, like, how can you not? I'm just like, and then she like opens the door a little bit, and I'm like, here's your laundry. She's like, okay, right? And she takes it, and you're like, what was that? Right? That's so bizarre. So this is, this is part of parting with childhood, right? And I think that, and it's very, very common, this kind of squirreling away in their rooms. And I think that the way we should see it, because it's so easy to feel like, why doesn't she want to hang out with us? Why is she, rejecting me? Why did she break up with me? Like, I was still really into this relationship, and now she's, she's moved on. And I think instead, this is how we should see it, and I really do think this is what's happening. I think somewhere at 11 or 12, there's a little math that goes on, like deep in the recesses. I don't think it's altogether conscious. Where girls are like, and boys too, they're like, wait, I am 2/3 of the way done living here. Like, I will be moving out in half the time I've lived here already. Which, if you think about being 12, like that would be a fairly alarming, realization. And so I think that there's a part of them that's like, okay, I've got to take this in steps, right? So let's do this. Let's just say that my room is now my apartment, okay? And I'm going to live here, right? and you are the nosy landlord who inexplicably knocks. Right? Like, do you remember when you had your first apartment and the landlord knocked? You're like, what the hell? Right? And you're like, do we get it? I don't know. I mean, like, and that's them. And so that's we're gonna do that, right? You're still gonna drive me everywhere and feed me, but like, notwithstanding, you're the nosy landlord, and I live here now in this space. And then I think like they're like, let's do this for 5 or 6 years, and then I'll move the rest of the way out. And if you think about it in that way, it's a really smart system. It's a really good idea. And I do a lot of like, well, let's consider the alternative. So the alternative is they continue to hang out with us at the same level, right? At 12, 13, 14, 15, like they want to talk to us, they're in our rooms, they're doing their thing, like their door's wide open, and then one day they're like, oh, gotta go off to college, right? Like that would be weird and harder. So I think if we see it as this adaptive and smart developmental step, I'll move out psychologically, I'll move out physically, that actually works. Another thing, and this means so much to me, if we think that there are 7 tasks that have to get done in the time that they are moving into adulthood, I think it makes us really honor, and I mean honor, how much development happens very fast. And I was saying this to the faculty, one of the beauties of schools like this is that sometimes you can like see a 5th grader and a 12th grader in the same sight line, And like if you think about a 5th grader and a 12th grader, like they cannot be even compared, right? I mean, they're from different planets, like developmentally. I mean, they really, really are. And that's only 7 years, right? And if like you think back on yourself 7 years ago, or if we think back on us 7 years ago, like we weighed less and nothing else has changed. We don't change that much, right? And we still find the day-to-day stressful, right? So like if you think, and we go with this rule in psychology, change equals stress. Like that is a given, All right, so you go from being a 5th grade human being to being a 12th grade human being in 7 short years. That is gonna be stressful, right? And it's gonna be stressful for everyone involved in that process. And just to allow that and be okay with that, I think is a huge thing. And then I think when we can say, okay, these are her tasks, she has these jobs, I think it helps us figure out where we fit in, right? And I think it's so easy sometimes as a parent of a teenager to be like, why is she doing this to me, right? I think that can be like, why is, and I really do mean it. I think a lot of parents feel like she broke up with me, like we were getting along great and she's moved on and I haven't, and I still am into this and she's coming and going. And I think when we can say, no, she's not dumping us, like she's doing her job, right? She's doing her job in a systematic way. I think it's so much easier to feel okay through the process and to feel like we can just bear with it and, withstand it more easily. Okay, so let's talk about each of these developmental strands. So let me start with parting with childhood, which is the first. Though I say, they move away, the reality is they don't move away like an inch a day, right? They don't become slightly more independent and autonomous every single day. What happens is they don't talk to us for 3 days, and then all of a sudden they're all over us, right? And that there's this back and forth process that can be tiring and weird as a parent, and confusing. And to describe it, I came up with this metaphor about 10 years ago of the swimming pool. And it's kind of long and it goes on, and I would have thrown it away, but I've had enough parents come back to me and say like, okay, that actually got us through several years, so I've stuck with it. So this is the metaphor. Your daughter is the swimmer, the water is the world, and you're the pool that holds the whole thing together. And like a swimmer, she wants to be in the water. She wants to be out in the world, she wants to be with the other swimmers, she wants to be gaining strength, she wants to be having fun. But also like a swimmer, things go wrong. She gets tired, she gets worn out, she has a bad lap, somebody pushes her under. And so when that happens, she comes scrambling for the wall. She has lost her breath and she comes scrambling for the wall to recover it. And like, can you remember that feeling as a kid where you're like, where's the wall, right? I gotta grab on. Okay, so this is us. So what it really does look like at home is like, you have not gotten more than 1-word answers for like 3 days straight, right? And like she is just out there. And then all of a sudden something's wrong and she is on you. And like often there's an on quality of like a draping themselves on you or coming up or getting in bed with you, right? Okay, so if your kid hasn't let you touch her for like 3 weeks, you're like, yes, right, you know? And like, I don't care that you're crying, like, you're letting me touch, I can smell you, you know, like that. Like, it's such a nice feeling. And they're upset, and they're talking to us, and they're telling us what's going on. And this, like, we're so happy, right? Because they're back, and they're close, and it feels so nice. Okay, so that's us. What's happening for her is that she's getting her breath back. And do you remember, again, like, being that kid in the pool, and like when you get your breath back, like you got it all the way back, you're totally fine again. You know, like it's like there's no like long recovery. You're like, oh no, I'm okay. So that happens to her, and then she's like, holy moly, like I am clinging to the ball like a baby. Like this is bad. Like this is really embarrassing. And so what she has to do is she has to get away. Like she has to shove off and push away and make a lot of distance very fast. And so this is when kids will do things where they say something kind of rude even, like you know, and that like, I love anything followed by the no offense, right? No offense, but like, your breath, like, it's weird. It's a weird breath, you know, or something like that, right? You know, and like, you know, or like, wait, did you wear that today? You know, like just something like that, like almost like it's helpful, right? And so the parent's experience is that you're just like, yay, we're back together. And then it's like a kick to the gut and she's gone. And it's exhausting. But again, it's a normal process and easier to withstand if you know what the story is. I don't think you should let your kid abuse you, right? So if she says something rude, be like, that was rude, right? I mean, I think you can mark those moments and acknowledge them, and she won't necessarily say, I'm sorry, I'll never do that again, but I think it's worth it to say it. The benefit is that you then can enjoy this for what it is, and I get letters now from people, which is a really interesting thing, like legit, like written letters. And this mom sent me a letter. She said, I just want you to know, boys do that swimming pool thing too. And what she described, she said, I have a 17-year-old son, and every once in a while, he will come into the room where my husband and I watch television, and he will lay his head in my lap and ask me to rub his back, right? Which is like a mother's dream, right? Like, you know, so, and she said, and then he will stand up and leave without a word, right? And she said, like, for the longest time, I was like, what did I do wrong? Like, how did I mess that up? And she said, now, when he comes in, she said it's not that often, but when he does, I rub his back, and I look over at my husband, and I go, you know? And she's like, and then when he leaves, like, I knew what was coming, I get it, he feels better, he got what he needed, he's off. You know, and so she says nothing to him about it, but she can now enjoy this while basically looking at her watch, you know, knowing like this is all I'm getting, and that's going to be okay. And I think that is the helpful point. Okay, so then the next developmental task that follows on the heels of this is joining a new tribe, right? And often is happening simultaneously. We can't be their best friends anymore, at least not in public, so they got to get other people, right? So they're going to get their classmates. This is anxiety-provoking. This is very intense. You know, it kind of hits its height in 7th grade often, like who are your people going to be? And it really is. That is because it is in 5th or 6th that they're like, oh wait, I can't hang out with you guys all the time, right? I mean, that's why 7th grade becomes so intense around this. One of the things that's really interesting that happens in the 7th grade, and so like late 6th and certainly by 7th, is a lot of conversation around popularity. Like who's popular, right? That becomes very interesting to kids. And I think it becomes interesting because the idea of popularity is you will have social connections, which is what kids need to know they will have. Like they need to know they will have at least a friend. So popularity is alluring in that way. One of the most striking research studies that I came across as I was working on my book is this study that is like in that wonderful category of like academic psychology, which explains stuff that is utterly recognizable once it is explained to you. You know, there's a lot of stuff in academic psychology you're like, yeah, I knew that. But then there's other stuff that you're like, oh my gosh, I did know that, but I didn't know I knew that, right? And this is in that second category. So what these researchers describe is that teenagers use the word popular to describe 2 different kinds of kids. So they use popular to describe those really well-liked, easygoing kids who get along with everybody. And they also use popular to describe kids who are willing to be mean and garner power as a function of that, right? That kids want to be closer to them so as not to be a potential target. And so it's kind of strange. You have actually very almost opposite groups riding under the same label, which is confusing for kids because popular sounds so good, right? But you've got two different versions of it. So one of the things that is very helpful to 7th graders or their ilk is to say, look, there's popular and there's powerful, right? There's popular, like kids who are genuinely likable, everybody enjoys them, and there's powerful, which are kids who have figured out how to use social power and don't always use it well. And when you make those distinctions, that is instantly recognizable to kids. They can be like, oh yeah, they can sort their class, very quickly. And then there's a lot of kids who are neither, which is fine too. But in terms of the kids who have gotten that label, they can make two different categories. What is really interesting is that distinction alone helps kids tremendously. And as a parent, I've done this where, my daughter will say, oh, so-and-so's popular, and I'll say like popular like everybody likes her, or popular like she makes kids nervous. And they can quickly make this distinction. Once they've made that distinction, what I think more than anything it does is it gives them permission to avoid the powerful kids. And I don't think they have that permission while they still are calling those kids popular. Like there's still some magnetism when the popular label is there. But when you're like, no, she's powerful and a little bit like unpredictable, they're just like, I'm just gonna hang out over here, right? And I was talking about this with the faculty. In the day of a 7th grader, they probably have 40 moments when they can choose to move closer to or further from a kid who makes them nervous. And if they are making a choice repeatedly to just sort of give that kid a wide berth, their life's gonna get better. Things are gonna be easier. The other thing I'll say, and I really do care about this a lot, I think the kids who are powerful, especially in girls' schools, we've traditionally called them mean girls. And I don't like to do that. One is, I think there's this ridiculous gender bias around that term. Like there's no mean boys term, though, and I had a little rant with the faculty about this. Statistically, boys are actually way meaner than girls, like interestingly, like if you just look at the numbers of like aggressive events. So there feels to me a little bit of an inherent sexism in the term. And the other thing is, there are lots of 7th graders who get a little drunk with power and then get their heads on straight in 9th grade. And it bums me out when those kids have gotten the mean girl label, and I worry that they can't shake it. And one of the gorgeous, I will say probably the most gorgeous thing about being at schools like Ellis and schools where I get to be is you get to see them from 7th through 11th and 12th grade, and like they change so much. They just change so much, and almost always way for the better, And so powerful for me feels like it softens that and just describes it in a more neutral way for what it is, right? So, I talk about this in the book. There was this old New Yorker cartoon of these two guys walking up Capitol Hill. Like we'll set aside all the politics for now, but and one guy's holding a briefcase and the other guy's holding a briefcase, and one says to the other, "Well, how do you know you have power if you don't abuse it?" Right? And it's sort of like that's the 7th grade, right? Like that's 7th grade, right? Like they're like, "Whoa, check it out, I'm mean," and like everybody wants to hang out with me. I think it's often just that random. I don't think it's usually as diabolical as we think it is. Okay, I'm going to say 2 minutes about social media, because it's like 2 minutes or 14 straight hours. So let's do 2 minutes, and I'm happy to come back on questions. Okay, this is ridiculously hard part of parenting at this point. We have nothing to go on, right? This is completely new to us. We cannot fall back on our own adolescence in this. We can't do what our moms did. It's a very hard thing to navigate as a parent. I think to make it more familiar makes it easier to know how to navigate it a little bit. And to make it more familiar, there's this beautiful quote from a researcher named Dana Boyd, who studies social media in kids. And she has this quote, which is, they're not addicted to each other, they're not addicted to technology, they're addicted to each other. And I think that is dead on. And I think when we remember that, it doesn't feel so strange to watch them on their phones or watch them with their stuff. And to get at the depth of how addicted we were to each other, there's a couple of things that I can plug back into. Okay, and this is so fun because we're all the exact same age, basically. So, okay, do you remember that feeling when you'd had the phone on your ear for like 3 hours? and it kind of hurt? Yeah, and it was hot, it kind of clammy, and you remember you'd be like, wait, hold on, I gotta change ears. Like, that was us, right? Like, everybody knows. Okay, and then the other one, do you remember when call waiting came out, right? Do you remember? And you were like, I have to have that. Like, I have to have that. And like, I wasn't this kid, but like I bet if we took a poll, like lots of you were this kid, where like you're like saying to your parents, okay, what's the phone bill without call waiting? What's the increment above the regular bill to pay for call waiting? I will pay for that. Right? I mean, like, you know, that we were desperate for it. We were desperate for it. Okay, why were we desperate for it? Fear of missing out, right? No, fear of missing out. Like, you know, if you have call waiting and somebody tried to call you, you would know, right? The other is, certainly in my house, you know, eventually, like 4 hours into me hijacking the phone, my mother would come to my room and be like, you have to get off the phone. Someone might be trying to call us. Do you remember that? And so then you're like, I'll tell you if they call, right? I mean, like, so like, it just, we were desperate. We were absolutely desperate to be connected. And what we just had, like, really bad technology, right? I think that's how we have to think about it. And I think the other thing, and it really does help, is if to think, if we had then the technology they have today, we would use it exactly the way they use it. And I think, you know, if you're like, I don't believe that, just think of that feeling. I really mean it. Like, we wanted to be together all the time. So it's changed the game in some very dramatic ways. Right? We got a break from each other. We didn't have to look at each other. Remember that? Like, we just like nobody saw you, right? Now they see each other. They're scrutinizing images. Like, I mean, there's a lot that's really different. But the fundamental wish to be connected, the fundamental wish to compare oneself to others, like we had it every bit that they have it. They just have a very taxing, a technology that makes this so amazingly connected and also, I think, very exhausting, fundamentally very exhausting for them. Okay, harnessing emotions. So, you know, certainly by 13, kids become really emotional. And one of the things we know is that there's often a peak around 13. And it's helpful to know that because I think sometimes it feels like it's come out of the gate so fast. You're like, oh my gosh, are we going up from here? And, you know, right? And usually, like, no, it actually, like, goes down from 13. So that's a good thing to know. But one of the things that's really hard is usually by 6th or 7th grade, kids just start complaining, like, a lot, right? They're, like, really complaining. And usually, you know, what do they complain about? They often complain about school, right? I mean, because that's their lives. And so it can be hard. And I can say this, you know, both as a psychologist and as a parent, like, you're tired, I'm tired at the end of the day. Like, you're psyched to see your kid, you're like, how was school? And they're like, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't, you know, like, it's a tough moment. Here's what I think is really helpful, again, to try to plug into their experience. School is actually, under the best conditions, under Ellis conditions, under Laurel School conditions, school is a very long day. It is a very long day. And if we took our lives and mashed it together with what school really is, like, here's what it would look like. It would be if I randomly selected like 20 of you, and I said, okay, I'm taking you guys and we're going in a room and you're gonna have a meeting. And that meeting is going to be 50 minutes long, and you cannot choose a topic, and you cannot choose how it's run, okay? And you're going to sit through that meeting, okay? All right, now we're leaving that room, and we're going to go in another room, right? And we're going to have another 50-minute meeting. Again, you don't choose the topic, you don't choose how it's run, okay? And you're going to sit there for 50 minutes, okay? We're going to go to a third room, right? And this is school. And we're going to have a third meeting. Same deal, we might throw a group project in there, right? You don't choose your group. No, you don't, right? And we're going to do that, okay. We're going to have another meeting. You're going to have lunch. You're going to have 3 more meetings, right? Okay, now you come back tomorrow, you do all the same meetings, right? Okay, oh, and you do that for 9 months straight. Right? I mean, like, we would be like, I'm not doing that. Right? Like, we would not even, like, you're like, no, I'm not after 3rd period. Like, this isn't happening, right? Okay, that's school. That is actually school. Like, that is legitimately school. You might enjoy one of those meetings a lot, and you might enjoy 2 of those people and how they run the meeting. Like, I mean, like, that's school. That's fine. That's totally fine that that's school. That has always been school. That will always be school. There's nothing wrong with that. Our daughters are so good through that. They go to meeting after meeting after meeting. They are thoughtful. They are participatory. They do the group project with the kid they never would have chosen. They get through the whole thing. They are wonderful. They hold it together gorgeously all day. And then they walk in the door and we're like, how was school, right? And they're like, really? Right? And either they do not want to discuss it at all. Because, like, why would they? Like, why would they have to repeat this, right? Like, it's happened, it's over. Or they tell us like what they went through. They're like, oh my God, and then this happened. Oh my God, and then that happened, right? And then we try to help, right? So then we're like, oh, well, did you tell them you didn't understand the instructions? I know I did not tell them I didn't know it. And you're like, okay. And you're like, okay, never mind. And they're like, oh, and then when this happened, you're like, oh, well, did you let them know that your locker was jammed? No, you don't understand. You don't understand. Okay, so what don't we understand? They don't want help. They don't want help. Like, they really, really don't. You know that, like, that gendered trope of, like, the wife who's trying to just vent and the husband who's offering suggestions, right? Okay, like, in that, like, the kid is the wife and we're the husband, right? Like, so she's just going, and we're making suggestions and she's completely appalled. That's not what she wants. Okay. Here's what she wants. She wants to dump the emotional trash of the day, and she wants you to take it so that she can go back to school without any trash. That's all she wants, like really very much. And I think it's good to think about it in that way. Like, kids pick up emotional trash through the day. Somebody bothers them, a teacher confuses them, they forgot something, and they don't react to it at school. They stick it in their pocket, they hold it together, and then we get in their presence and we say, how was it? And they're like, here's all the trash. And our job is just to usually collect it. Let them vent, right? Don't worry that there's something wrong. In fact, this is a wonderfully adaptive process. I think one thing that you can do if you're like dying is you can say, do you want my help or do you just need to vent? And a lot of kids will just say, I just need to vent. And you just let them do it. Several months ago, I was at a school and this 9th grader, I was meeting with the girls and I was like, is there anything you want me to say to your folks? And this 9th grade girl was like, yes, please. She was like, when I tell my parents about my day, the only thing I want them to say back to me is, oh my God, that sucks. And I was like, you got it. Like, I will tell them that. And it's amazing. Like, that actually really is, that'll do it. Like, that really does it. And it was funny because, well, not funny, but like shortly after that, I went to the funeral of one of my friend's dads, and he was, end of life, not a tragedy, and many of us came together to sort of, be there for her at the funeral. And I ran into a college friend of mine named Neetha, and I was like, Neetha, what's up? She's like, I have to have back surgery. And I was like, Neetha, that sucks, right? Because I just had this conversation with a girl, and she goes, oh, thank you, oh my gosh, thank you so much. She said, everybody I talked to was like, well, did you try physical therapy? She's like, of course I tried physical therapy. Like, of course I got like 4 opinions. Like, so it's just like, I was like, this is really it. That's all you need to do. And it's just easier and your kid will be so glad. Okay, so, all right. So then we get to contending with adult authority, which is, I will say this was my favorite chapter to write of the book. Most of the treatment of kids not doing what grown-ups want them to do is treated like adolescent rebellion, like those naughty teenagers. And I actually think it's like a much more amazing and sophisticated process than all that. And I pretty much have the beginning of this chapter memorized. And the way it goes is, the scene in The Wizard of Oz when Toto pulls back the curtain and Dorothy suddenly sees that, like, the great and powerful Oz, like, it's just this guy, and he's just pulling levers. Like, he doesn't really know what he's doing. That's 14 or 13, right? Where you're just like, wait a minute, like, you guys don't really know what you're doing all the time, right? Like, I've bought it up till now, but like, you're just older, and they're not altogether wrong. Right? I mean, they're not. They're really not. And I think, it doesn't help because we do make stuff up, right? And we're like, no, you can't go out with wet hair, you'll get a cold. Like, that's not how science works, And so we say stuff that they're like, I looked it up on the internet, and so they start to doubt us. And that's hard, right? It's hard. It's hard to go from having a kid who basically goes along to a kid who questions everything. But it is their job, and I think it's helpful to see it as their job. I will say, if you don't have a sense of humor about yourself, and you're raising a teenager, you need to get a sense of humor about yourself. It is so much easier. If you take yourself very seriously, this gets very hard very fast. The other thing I will say, and I mean this wholeheartedly, if you do not have a way to feel good and valued and worthy in the world, separate from being admired by your teenager, like you need to get that too, right? Like right away, like you know, from your job, from your board work, from your, you know, whatever you do, you get valued during the day, you get complained to at night. Like that's the deal, and that's great and it works fine. But if you are counting on your kid coming home and making you feel good about her day or your worth, it's not going to work out. So that, I just would say, is much more normative than I think we talk about. The other thing that happens is they start complaining about other adults a lot, you know, as part of these complaints. And they're very clear-eyed. I think kids tend to be very accurate about grown-ups. And I don't usually disagree with kids about grown-ups. I tend to think, I don't endorse them wholeheartedly, but I don't question a lot. Like, you know, I think they're often pretty dead on. And I tell this story in the book, and this to me did feel like a very important developmental moment for me, which was that when I was in the 10th grade, I hated my trigonometry teacher. Like, I just had this huge beef with him. In the book, I call him Mr. Martin, which is not his real name. But I will tell you, like, this was 30 years ago. I'm like, I want to tell you his real name. Like, you know, like pathetically bitter 30 years later. And so, but I won't. So unless you ask. So I spent 10th grade like, oh, I hate Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin's the worst. You know, and like Mr. Martin, he doesn't turn stuff back to us in time. And, you know, Mr. Martin, he doesn't explain anything. And Mr. Martin's tests on what he says are going to be about. You know, so I was just sort of like going on and on and on and on. And my mom, my mom's pretty tough, and she put up with it for a while. And then I remember, like, one day in the kitchen, she was like, listen, there is nowhere on your high school transcript to write next to your grade, I don't like Mr. Martin. Like, you got to figure it out. Like, she was sort of tired and done. And, okay, so I don't know what I said. I'm 100 billion% sure I didn't say, like, wow, that was a really helpful insight, Mom. Like, I'm so glad you said that, right? I'm sure I was like, you know, left the kitchen. Okay, but two really smart things in that. One is my mom did not question my views, right? Like, she didn't say, like, really, is he that bad? Like, what would I have said, right? Like, oh no, maybe, you know, I mean, like, you know, there's no profit in that, like, doubting, right? And the other was, like, she's like, so go manage it, right? Like, I believe you, and I think you can handle this. Right? That was the messaging that I got from her. And so I will say, like, that, the way that has trickled down into my own parenting is I think a lot about, like, life gives us 3 categories of stuff that come at us. Stuff we like, stuff we can handle, and stuff that's a crisis, right, where we need to call in support. And one of the things that can be a challenge, especially when you're a teenager, is you don't remember there's that middle category. You're like, there's stuff I like, and there's stuff that's a crisis. Right? And when your kid's in crisis, you can feel in crisis, right? So I think part of what I'm constantly evaluating as a parent, and I think we need to do, is to say, like, oh no, wait, there's this whole middle category, right? There's like all the teachers you like, all the teachers you can handle, right? And then things that are a crisis. So if a teacher is being cruel, if a teacher is being sadistic, whatever, like, let me know, I will help it. Your teacher's annoying to you, okay, yeah, welcome to life. And I hear you and I believe you, right? I mean, I think part of what my mom did, she was like, sure, okay, the guy's a turkey, like, I'm not gonna fight you on that. Go manage, right? So I think validating and then saying, get back in there and figure it out, and I'm here to help you figure it out. But that handle category needs, you know, it's helpful to have that fully articulated when kids are annoyed with grown-ups, right? There's a lot of annoying grown-ups to them. They're often not wrong, but they can still handle that. And they need to know how to handle that. Okay, planning for the future. This one of the things I think about a lot, like planning for the future is sort of a big, you can do it big, do it small. I think procrastination gives us a place to think about short-term choices that make long-term impacts. So short-term planning and long-term sort of outcomes. So most kids procrastinate at one point or another. You know, and it's best if we can sort of jump on it or deal with it in the early grades. There's nothing wrong with a kid who procrastinates. Humans procrastinate, adults procrastinate. We procrastinate on work we like, right? They procrastinate, you know, on stuff that has been assigned to them, like subjects they never would have chosen, right? So it's not concerning that a kid in and of itself procrastinates. That's not concerning. I think what's really hard as a parent is to not get in there and try to do something about it for them. And what I would say is, let this fall apart in the early grades so that it is sorted out for later. And I'll sort of walk you through what I mean. So, okay, so your sixth grader comes home, and you know she's got a project due the next day, and you know she's not been on it. Okay, so you see her come in the house, she puts her stuff down, and then she just sort of veers towards the Netflix, right? So she's headed that way. Okay, so you have a moment here to make a decision. So one choice is you say to her, hey, don't you have that project? I think you have that project due tomorrow. Okay. So if you go down that path and stay down that path, I think there's two outcomes, and I think they're both not so great. So one outcome is she does it because you are on her case about it. And so it gets done because you have exerted that pressure. The other is she becomes very frustrated with you and you become very frustrated with her. So I'll get to it, you're like, well, you said that last time. And like you can script it, right? And the evening kind of goes down the drain that way, like of a dumb fight over this project. Okay, so those are both not so great. The other thing that could happen is she comes in, she dumps her stuff, she's headed towards Netflix, and you could say, listen, like, you and I both know you have a project due tomorrow, right? And you and I both know it's not on Netflix, all right? Like, I'm going in the living room. Like, I've said my piece, right? Okay, so two outcomes from here. One is, this makes her sufficiently uncomfortable that she goes and does the project just to get it off of her back. Like, you know, she's now bothered that this is hanging over her and she gets it done. The other is she doesn't do it, right? She just ruins the evening or loses the evening watching whatever she's doing, whatever. Okay, so it'll be ugly in the morning, right? She'll be freaking out that the stuff isn't done, right? And you're gonna have to say, yeah, I'm really sorry that's how you did this, right? Or that's the choice you made, like you're gonna sort it out at school, right? And this is, of course, the gorgeous, beautiful thing of having a school like Ellis is that like she will sort it out at school. Like they will, you know, they'll figure it out with her, they'll help her, you know, sort out what needs to happen. But that outcome is actually a great outcome. And I promise you, kids, if they do it twice, it's amazing. Usually one of these where they have to show up at school and really manage it, they don't put themselves in this position again. And sometimes when I've been at schools, I'll ask kids like for messages or things they want me to share. And I have to tell you, like, I am so surprised how often, though I've not like, you know, sort of primed any of this, kids will say, could you just tell my parents to let me deal with the consequences of what I do? And when I've gone back to kids and said, like, really? Like, you'd rather, like, have a problem at school and have them nag you? They're like, oh, yes, like, please, like, I will just deal, I will deal. And so I think if you've got a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grader who's procrastinating, like, let that fall apart. Like, let that fall apart. I think it's much harder when they're 9th, 10th, 11th to let things fall apart, right? Because it feels like it counts. So sort that out when they're little, and it will fix itself. Okay, entering the romantic world. Okay, this is every parent's like least favorite chapter of my book. Here's what I'll say. Most of what I wrote for this book either deepened or extended what I was already doing. This chapter completely changed how I talk to girls about their romantic life. So I'll tell you what I did, and I'll tell you what I do now. This is personal, this is how your family wants to do things, so I'm not saying go do it my way, but just this is how my thinking has evolved. So I used to do, and you know, this is a lot of what I do at Laurel School, is have these kinds of conversations with girls. So I used to do what I think a lot of us do, which is the kind of like, all right guys, let's talk about your romantic life, and by guys I mean girls, let's talk about your romantic life. Okay, you don't want to get pregnant, okay, don't get an STD, right, don't get yourself in a bad position. Yeah, I don't say this, some adults say this, like, don't harm your reputation. Okay, go have fun, right? Like that was like, it was a list of don'ts, like that was the talk. And through a lot of reading and a lot of thinking, I'll tell you what I do now. And I will tell you, when I have this conversation with girls, the first thing I say, they are very, very surprised by it. So I say, okay, you're thinking about your romantic life whenever it begins. You know, whether it's hand-holding, wherever you are in your romantic life, you know, in your physical side of your romantic life. Okay, there's 4 things to think about. The first thing you have to think about is, what do you want? What would you like? And I've actually had girls blurt out, no adult has ever said that to me. And I'm like, we don't. right? We don't. Okay, so one, what do you want? What would you like to have happen? The other is, second thing is, what does your partner want to have happen? What would they like? What would they enjoy? Third, what do you both want to have happen? And I've started to say this, and I'm surprised that I've gotten pretty zealous about this. I now say to girls, we usually talk in terms of consent, right? And we are having long overdue conversations about consent. I cannot stand the word consent anymore. Like, I'm completely done with that word. It is to grant permission. It is to allow something, right? We give consent for root canals, right? Like we do, right? It has no place in the physical side of your romantic life. So what do you want? What does your partner want? What are you both enthusiastically agreeing to? And then, does that involve risks? Could someone get their heart broken? Could someone get pregnant? Could someone get an STD? Okay, well then you need to manage the risks. But want, agree, risk management. And so this is how I do it. And what's interesting is, in cultures where this is done this way, where sort of joy and responsibility are the lead off, and by cultures I mean exclusively the Dutch, like they're the only ones. It's only the Dutch. It's only the Dutch. They have the best adolescent sexual health in the world. Their teenagers are not having more sex than our teenagers are. Their teenagers are taking much better care of themselves. And by better care of themselves, how do we measure adolescent sex? Girl measures usually. Pregnancy, things like that. Girls who feel like they are there because they want to be there take good care of themselves in that context. In America, since we have said don't, which I actually, and this is the part where I'm like, I can't, this was a sort of a soul searching that was very difficult. I think that don't get pregnant, I think that's basically don't have sex. Like, just don't. And I also think underneath that is, we're gonna ask you girls to not have sex because we're not gonna ask the boys to not have sex. So you guys are in charge of policing the whole thing, right? So that message, which it's hard for me to acknowledge that that's probably the message I give hundreds of girls, right? But we do as a culture. That message means, so if you're there, you probably shouldn't be there, right? And so then girls don't come prepared, they don't always come sober, right? I mean, like, there's all of these things that then are the results of that message, which do not involve our daughters taking good care of themselves. So want, agree, risk is where the data also line up in terms of them taking good care of themselves. So I've come around on that one. I've come a long way, I feel like. Okay, so let's wrap up talking about caring for themselves. And I had a great conversation with the faculty about this. Like, I feel really strongly about this. You know, we want our kids to take great care of themselves, right? We want them to be able to go off to college feeling like they got this, right? And that we're not scared for them. And we know that they can manage themselves. And what I talked with about the faculty, and I feel very strongly about this at home, you can start this process with really little kids, right? When you've got a 2-year-old who is wiggling and not taking themselves to the potty, you can say, your body is telling you it needs to go potty. Go take good care of yourself and take it to the potty, you know? You can start there. At dinner with, 6-year-olds, you can say, look, you have to have 3 bites of green. It's how you take care of your body, right? When you do that, then we can have some other stuff, but you gotta take good care of yourself. You know, with your 6th grader who is sneaking her phone into her room and staying up all night, right? You can say, like, look, you're not taking good care of yourself. Like, you need to sleep. Like, I'll take the phone. Like, this is about your self-care. So you can start this all along. Then you get to, the stuff in high school where things are really, could make a big difference in their lives, like the choices they make, And so we want those things to be thought about in terms of the care of the self, right? Not in terms of, please don't drink at the party because if I catch you, right? Because then, of course, in the mind of any teenager, they're like, okay, how do I not get caught? There's nowhere to go, but how do I not get caught? But, I'm asking you not to drink at the party because it's not safe, right? That's my concern. And so what I would say is, get that word safe at the center of your thinking with teenagers, because that is what all of our rules are about, right? If you knew your kid were going to be 100% safe, they could do anything they wanted, really. I mean, it's safety that makes us nervous. And the way I've thought about it, would be so weird, but it would be kind of fun to do. Your kid would freak out. My kid would freak out. If we installed, neon light in our kitchen that said safety and, had a nearby switch, right? So, just imagine this at least. So if your kid's like, why can't I go to this party? I'm sure there'll be some drinking, but it won't be a bad idea. And you'd be like, oh, safety, right? I'd love to send you to the party, but I need to know you're safe, right? And until I know you're safe, it's not an option, right? But you know how like all communities have that kid where like the house is slightly out of control, right? So we'll say that kid's Martha, because I can't imagine you have a lot of Marthas at Ellis right now. Okay, so so you're like, why can't I go over to Martha's? Safety, right? Like I think Martha's a real ton of fun, but when you go to her house, I'm not sure you're safe until you convince me you're safe. You can't go, right? Why can't we throw 3 extra kids in the car? We're only going a half mile. Safety, right? Having extra kids in the car makes it less safe. There's reasons for the laws. The laws are sometimes connected to safety. This is one of them, right? So it's not. You're right, I'm the loser parent who's making your life unfun, right? Like that's often how these are pitched. Why can't I do this, right? Like it's, it's hard not to feel like, no, because wow, I said so, right? It's not, I said, it's a safety question, right? And if your rules aren't tied to safety, like I would reevaluate them, right? That's the only reason to have rules for teenagers, really, is safety and, basic health. So I think the goal, right, is that they see safety as the only thing they're trying to preserve. And I will say, and I say this often out of the girls at Laurel, look, the chances of you getting caught are actually really low, right? Like you guys can do pretty much anything you want without a grown-up catching you. Like that's like, don't focus on that. Focus on whether you're gonna get hurt. Like that's the only thing I care about. And I told the faculty, and I say this, and it's kind of annoying, I'm sure, weird that I say this, but I say to the upper school girls, I'm like, look, I don't want you getting arrested. Like, I can say that for sure. But by the time you're arrested, I know you're safe, so that doesn't bother me that much. Right, like what really matters to me is what could happen if no one knows what you're doing and it goes out of control. Like that's what makes me nervous. You guys getting arrested, whatever. Like it's the Shaker cops. Like it'll be fun, right? So, but it's like, but I think it's helpful to just remind them because they can get preoccupied with rules, they can get preoccupied with laws. That's not what it's about. Right? It's not what it's about. And I think to keep safety at the center all the time. So I will wrap up there. I'll just say, like, I hope you are enjoying your teenagers, right? I hope that talking about it together makes them more enjoyable. I think one of the hardest things for me about parenting a teenager is it can feel very isolating, right? Some of what goes on in your house, you're like, I can't talk about this because, like, I'm not sure it's okay, and also I don't want to bust your privacy, right? I mean, there's some of that, right? Like, where you just, but it can leave, I think, me and other parents feeling like, is this okay? Is this, like, what's going on in other people's homes, too? And I think it can make something hard that much harder. So, my aim in writing and talking and thinking about this, and I'm so glad you came tonight, is that I think it's easier to withstand if there's a sense of like, no, this is normal, this goes on in other homes too, right? This isn't just us. And I think it's so much easier, like when your kid's 3 and you're at the playground and you're like, oh yeah, they're doing this through the night, and it's so much harder at 17 when we can't have those same kinds of conversations. So thank you for being here tonight.
Appreciate it. She's my third. The other 2 survived. So
yeah, they're fine.
But I have a question, just in particular, when you have a child who puts a lot of input into academics, but the output is not indicative of the input, how do you deal with the emotions with that?
Okay, so that's a really tough one, right? Okay, so first of all, those kids are my heroes, right? Because I have to say, if I put in as much work as some of these kids put in and didn't get the payoff, I'd be like, I'm out. Like the fact that they continue to work at the rate they do, I find really remarkable. So I guess one thing for me feels, this is a heavy-handed, or like a little bit of a diagnostic question. Like, what's going on? Like, does she have a learning difference that's not, and I don't want you to answer this, but like, I would think first like, usually there's a little bit more reciprocity or like a little more connection between like how hard you work and the outcomes you get. So when those things aren't clicking as much, I'm always like, is there something we're missing here? Another thing, and I talked about this with the faculty, our girls are really wildly inefficient studiers. Right, they are. So we have tons of data about how to study, because it's very easy to measure this. The absolute drop-dead worst ways to study are reviewing your notes and highlighting. Okay, this is overwhelmingly what kids do. The vastly more efficient and effective ways to study are self-testing and quizzing. And so I am always saying to the after-school girls at Laurel, you guys need to become more tactical. You need to spend less time reviewing. You need to spend more time writing the test you think you're going to get and taking it, I am like, you guys, if you're taking the ninth grade bio class, quiz on mitochondria, go get online and Google ninth grade bio quizzes on mitochondria, print them off, take them, and then go to class. This is not cheating. But, so I don't know if that helps, but they adopt these highly conscientious overstudying habits early I think in middle school usually, where they're reviewing, memorizing, and then they take those to the upper school with them when the testing has actually changed pretty dramatically in the upper school. A lot more testing is like applying what you know in novel ways on the test. And no school, Laurel included, even though I'm like ranting about this constantly, is very good at being transparent with kids about that transition. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I would wonder a little bit more about why. But if there's no reason, right? I mean, if it's not, then I think like she should just be getting medals every 5 minutes, right? Like I really mean it. Like I think you should just say to her, like, I have so much respect for your willingness to work. Anyone who was working as hard as you were and weren't seeing the results, like they would have given up months ago. I am so impressed by this. This will pay off for you, I promise, down the line. But I don't know how those kids do it.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks for coming today. You enjoy your book a lot.
Oh, thank you.
At what point when you let them go, one time, second time, I can handle it. How do you like say this is how you need to help them, like based on the consequence, based on like because as a parent you care, right? Like
Oh yeah.
you want to help them so much. Like I saw my friends like working on a science project again and again and again every weekend, and I'm not doing that. I want her to learn, but you have like social beauty and all that. At what point do you decide?
So how old are we talking?
She's 7th grade, and
Seventh
it's
grade.
completely different from 6th grade. Like I'm kind of practical. Like she loves to do stuff, and then she's smart.
Uh-huh.
She can't organize like the way
Yeah.
you want her to.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, so I think one question is it bugging her, right? Is the grade that she's getting, does she dislike it, right? That to me would be the first question to get an answer to. Because if she's unhappy about the grade, you can be like, oh hey, look at that, like there is a solution here, right? Which is if you got yourself organized, or you let me help you get yourself organized, then you could get different grades. I think that what's hard is sometimes they're like, that's cool, I'm fine with C. You're like, I'm not fine with C. Okay. So then, and this is fairly elaborate, and so you may not want to go all this way, but if you feel like, no, this is actually time for you to learn how to do this stuff, right? And I'd like for you to get a better set of habits before you do hit the 9th grade. I think what you can say to her is, look, like you maybe find this with C, we're not fine with C. Because you're not showing us that you can manage yourself and exercise good judgment, right? And I need you to show me that you can manage yourself and exercise good judgment on that project if you want me to drop you off at the mall with your 3 friends and pick you up 2 hours later. Because I'm expecting you're going to manage yourself and exercise good judgment at the mall. So if I can't see those things on the stuff I can see, you're not going to get to try those things out on stuff I can't see. So sometimes the only leverage you have is the wish for freedom. Right? And with teenagers, that's like huge leverage. And that judgment and management argument does hold up, right? I mean, because you could say, like, they're like, I want to go to Martha's, right? And you're like, okay, you won't even remember to take out the dog when I ask 4 times, so you're not pulled enough together to do that. You have to be so pulled together to go to Martha's, right? Like, until the dog and you have this sorted out, and I'm not asking 4 times, there's no way. What kind of mother would I be to send you somewhere where you actually really have to be on point, right? So I think that that's a fair argument. So you have to decide how much muscle you want to put behind it. Yeah. It's exhausting, though. I'm like, stick with it. It's like, I couldn't do it to save my life. Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about the importance of affirming your child's thoughts, which I think is very important. I have a child who sometimes makes sweeping statements, everybody, or
The worst.
this friend hates me.
Yeah.
And so, finding that balance of, I'm saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I really don't think that.
Yeah. No, it's hard when you're like, okay, she's dead wrong, and I don't want to passively or even explicitly endorse, right, like this kind of thing. Okay, so I think, sometimes when kids are making this kind of dramatized statements, like, this is the worst ever in the history of anything, you're like, settle down, right? But like, that doesn't go over well. I think one thing you can say that helps, if you feel like I don't want to get on board with this, but I don't want to fight her on it either, you can say, for what it's worth, I have a different view if you want to hear it. Like, I would do that half step, and she may be like, I don't want to. And you'll be like, okay. But she already knows that you are not on board with what she said, which is not a bad place. If it stops there, that's okay. If she happens to say, okay, what? Then she's opened the door and you may have half a chance of actually getting your point across. But I think I would start with that half step before you say, like, now let's be reasonable, right? I mean, like, because no one, however irrational their statement has ever calmed down because somebody said, no, let's calm down for a minute, right? That never works. But, so I would just say that half.